Good morning. I'm glad you're here. My name is Rita Hickman. I'm a body mind expert and a shiatsu massage therapist. But most importantly, is I use those great tools and wisdom of Asian medicine and shamanic medicine and community and latest cutting edge science on metaphysics and on the body mind. And I pull it all together and I help women get what they need to heal from narcissism. And so if you're here, hopefully it's because, you're reaching out, you're looking for help and support in order to deal with a narcissistic relationship, whether it's your spouse or your partner or your mother or one of your kids or somebody in your family. Narcissism is a really difficult mental health issue to live with. It's hard on the narcissist and it's hard on the victim. It's very hard on the victim. And it leaves damage that lasts for decades and decades, especially if the narcissist was in someone's own family. One of the most confusing parts about a narcissist is their seemingly Jekyll-and-Hyde personality. So one moment they're caring and affectionate and loving and supportive, and then a switch flips and something will happen, whether it was a bad day at work or bad weather, or whether someone didn't quite measure up to their expectations of what something could look like, or maybe they just had negative thinking. They took a situation and they looked at it and it was interpreted in the most negative light, and there you had it. You deserved to be a victim in a narcissist's eyes. So how do they go back and forth? How do they go back and forth between being some of the kindest, gentlest, most supportive people, especially to everybody else, to the one person in their life that probably loves them more than anybody else, treating them like they're dirt, like they are scum of the earth, and like they deserve everything that happened to them. Every anger, every vicious threat, whatever it may be, that it's deserved. How can they go from that, from one to the other, from being a Prince Charming or a knight in shining armor to somebody who is your biggest nightmare, and you have no idea how you ended up trapped in a family or in a personal relationship that's just so painful. So what's this whole Jekyll and Hyde thing about anyways? Well, a lot of people who struggle with narcissism, they struggle with having a very compartmentalized brain. Let's talk a little bit about trauma. When we have a trauma experience of some sort, then it gets compartmentalized, it gets protected, usually because our brain isn't ready to deal with it. Now, with a lot of people, if all they had was a little bit of trauma and nothing else going on, then usually they have a chance to process through it in some way. They find somebody to help them process through it. They get a therapist that can help them process through it. And you may be looking at the situation like, hey, I totally get that you had trauma, but why don't you deal with this issue? Why don't you why don't you get help? Why don't you go to therapy? Why don't you work on it? I've had trauma. What's the problem? Well, someone's a narcissist on a high level of narcissism, typically because they also have an underlying brain disorder of some sort. ADD is very common. ADHD is very common. Bipolar not as common, because ADD and ADHD are just so rampant, and it's based on not getting enough stimulation to the brain. So when someone struggles with ADD or ADHD, then they have a difficult time processing through something. And typically they have to process through verbally. And so when they get triggered, just like sometimes you get triggered, from your trauma, either from a narcissist or from the past, when they get triggered, they're not able to pull themselves back. They're not able to pause and self-reflect very well. They're not able to wait and still see the person that they love as the person that they love. They're not able to put any buffer around it. It's either all or nothing, because with their brain not able to process very well because it's always jumping around and not getting enough stimulation, they are in the moment of their trauma, period, and they can't get themselves out of it. Think of it, as I said, like a switch flipping on or off. And so when they go back to the biggest pain of their life, that trauma, which wasn't processed very well because they never had a chance to process it. And every time they do, it's looked at shame and blame and guilt and too many issues around it to let themselves process it. Then you get the full force of all of that, of all of their pain and all of their suffering. Now, is this right or is this wrong? Who knows? It's just the side effect of who they are. And what will happen is you'll end up victimized over and over and over. Because it's not just enough about getting therapy or getting help. It's also working on the underlying brain disorder that's going on. So they are incapable many times to do deeper self-reflection because they just haven't had a chance to work through the stuff they've compartmentalized. They haven't figured out how to process through it. And a lot of people don't really help them because, frankly, narcissists can be really big, mean, unkind jerks. So then when the emotion dials down, when a little bit of time goes by and they get in a better mood again, they move from the place that they were, the amygdala, the fight or flight, back into their frontal lobe, and they see you again. And they say, aha, this is the person that I care about. This is the person that I love. A lot of things that I see around narcissism, I spend every morning looking at, questions people have and issues they're working with. And a lot of the information that I see out there is all about a lot of shame and blame for everybody involved, for the narcissist, for the victim. And that doesn't move anybody forward. It's only when we can realistically look at people for who they are, to put down our anger, to put down our hurt, our PTSD, and we can look that they're struggling with something, that we're able to usually to let go. Because I'm not saying, and nobody's saying, that you should stay in a relationship with a narcissist, especially if they're, emotionally brutal and you have a highly sensitive nervous system or more empathic, because you aren't made for that relationship. You aren't made to endure that. Whereas for narcissists, there really are relationships that do work for them. It's usually with people who aren't very, don't have that high level of empathy. They don't have that high empathic sensitivity to their surroundings and to people. So maybe they're more on the end of scientists or engineers or Asperger's or autism. They're more capable emotionally of staying in a relationship with a narcissist because the anger and the hurt really doesn't affect them to the same degree. Now, you, on the other hand, probably being sensitive and caring and empathic and not wired for that, will be brutalized by a narcissist. But the way we let go is we realize who they really are, which are not horrible, disgusting, awful people, even though that's what they'll tell you you are. And that's what they'll gaslight you into believing. And that's what they'll brainwash you into thinking. And that's what you will assume you have to do. They'll use those words. But in reality, there's someone who's struggling with a mental health disorder. And if they choose not to get help, if they choose not to work on it, then it's not a relationship you need to stay with. Now, if someone does have higher narcissistic tendencies, and they recognize that that's not the way they want to live anymore, either because they've had a lifetime of relationships which have blown up in their face, or maybe there's a really good reason for them to start not being as focused on themselves and to work through the trauma and to deal with the underlying ADD or ADHD or bipolar, to work on managing that and getting emotional regulation skills. If someone isn't willing to do that, then they're going to stay the same way because it's more biology than it is the fact that you did something wrong. They behave in the way that they do from both nature and nurture. So you being perfect, you doing everything right isn't going to matter. It's still going to have that Jekyll-and-Hyde switch. It's still going to have like a switch is flipped, and it literally is. It's where a person goes from their conscious frontal lobe, something triggers them and they go into fight or flight. And that is so unprocessed and still so big in pain that anybody around, the person that they've decided should be the victim is the victim. So in many ways, that's how they're able to go back and forth, in public with people who they have decided they needed to, that are not worthy of being victims, or that it's not worth them victimizing them. They can be very friendly. They know exactly how to get along with life. And in fact, a lot of narcissists do have a high level of sensitivity to their environment. They understand things, they get it. And that's how they're able to really find the most painful things that will hurt you the most, because they get it. They understand that. They just haven't processed through their stuff. So a lot of misunderstanding is what keeps us in relationships, thinking that someone will change, thinking that someone can change, thinking that it really is your fault. And if you just do better, if you just do more, then it'll all turn out okay. But that's not true. It really has nothing to do with you. It has to do with an unresolved problem that they have that they need to get help for. And if they don't get help for, then that problem will continue and continue to make their life worse. And you get to decide whether you want to be a part of that or not. So take away the judgmentalism for yourself and somebody else. Realize that what they're doing is how they're wired to do it. And you get to choose whether you want to stay or not. Even if it's your mother, you get to recognize, aha, she's triggered. There's no getting out of this. There's no fixing it. There's no fighting your way through it. There's no making your statement. There's nothing you can do, literally. And so when you recognize that someone is triggered, your best defense is a really good boundary that says, I don't deserve to be treated this way. I'm not going to be treated this way. And until you're able to get back into, your right mind, let's say, we're not going to communicate. So on the other hand, when a narcissist has really pushed you away, you've gotten angry, they feel better, then there's this whole love bombing phase. And you know what? A lot of that's based on guilt. A lot of it's based on the fact that they need you somehow make them feel better, either from a trauma bond, or because you're the nicest person they have in their life, or because you're just there all the time. You make them feel better. And so because of that, they don't want to lose it, and they will love bomb you, and they will pull you in, and they will attract you in and do everything on the opposite side of the scale. It doesn't mean that they're evil. What it means is that they are someone who needs more help than you can give them. They need more help than you can give them, because where they're at right now, they can't even see you. They can't see you. They can't see your feelings. You're not even a person, because they're so wrapped up in their own internal craziness that they're not capable many times of seeing that you are someone who has value and meaning and deserves to be treated well. And until you decide to respect yourself, and you respect how you behave and how you respond and how you deal with things, until you raise your game to become the person that you want to be, someone who doesn't let their trauma control you, someone who doesn't let a narcissist control you. When you become that stronger version of yourself, that healthier version of yourself, then typically either a narcissist will get help themselves, or they'll leave because they don't know how to be in a healthy relationship. They don't know how to handle it. They haven't gotten the help yet. So the Jekyll-and-Hyde thing, it's really going from the frontal lobe to the amygdala. It's going from the conscious, rational mind that says, yeah, I remember that I love this person. I remember that this person is important to me. And it flips into their nightmare they're reliving again, all of that anger and hurt and pain that they've compartmentalized. Because with their brain, they don't process through things very easily. It's difficult for them to process their trauma, unlike for you, which, you're like, well, if I work with a good therapist, if I work with a good healer, I'm able to process through this and move on. They aren't. So they're still really stuck at that young age when they had those big traumas. So if you look at them and you think, oh, I could help. Oh, I could, fix them. Oh, maybe there's something I can do. There really isn't, because it's not about you. It's about their mental health disorder and their PTSD and getting support for that. And until they do, they're going to continue to be Jekyll and Hyde, no matter how perfect you are, no matter what you say. And your best defense are those boundaries and treating yourself with self respect, not allowing yourself to be pulled into that dynamic and that energy. Say, I'm not willing to deal with this. I'm not willing to be treated this way. And so, because of that, I'm walking away right now. It's having respect for yourself. It's having respect for how you behave, having your own integrity, having your own sense of self as to who you are and who you want to be. Start with that. Start with who you choose to be, and then put things in place that help you behave that way, which includes tons of self respect. If a narcissist is going to get help, it's going to be because they have to, because they have no other choice, either because something in life happened, or or they got older, or they finally were able to have enough experiences where they processed it through. But many narcissists who do make changes, they make them when they're older, after they've had a lot of support, after they've had a lot of life experiences, and they're able to grow up a little bit. Typically, if they're in their 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s, it's not time yet. They're still in that place of trying to process through that old trauma that they dealt with and figuring out how their brain works, that you are the least of their concerns. So if you're dealing with someone who has Jekyll and Hyde syndrome, and that's what narcissists do, realize that this is who they are. This is what they do. And typically it's not meant, to destroy everything that they know. It's how they're wired. And you get to decide whether this is something you want to live with or something you don't. And you get to decide what you'll experience and what you'll tolerate and what you won't. And you'll start to put those things in place. And if a narcissist is ready and you are holding that bar high for them, then they'll start to make shifts and changes. But if they're not ready, and most of them aren't, let's be honest, because there's no reason to, then they're going to continue in their pattern of behavior of finding relationships that will let them, that will be okay with their guilt and shame and trauma without expecting them to do anything different, or falling into the same dynamic of fighting with them when they're in that space. When you behave that way, that's what keeps them locked in, because it's the dynamic they've always had. But when you choose to respect yourself, when you choose to set those boundaries, I don't deserve to be treated this way. I'm not going to be treated this way. And when you do this, this is what I have to do, no matter who it is. When you start doing that, it helps the narcissist reflect a little bit and realize that they have to sit with their boundaries. They have to sit with their experience. And a lot of narcissists, believe it or not, when you set good boundaries, they will go self-reflect, because it's not that people are evil. It's that, of course, some people are, but in general, people are doing the best that they know how, and you get to decide whether you want to join them on that journey or whether you don't. And they won't necessarily change, and they definitely won't change for you. It has to be something much bigger, where they hit a bottom, where they feel like they have no choice. And only your healthy behaviors, only your healthy boundaries have any chance of making an impact. And many times when you do that, as I said, a lot of good people who also have high narcissistic traits, usually because of stuff like borderline personality, they will take that chance because they have no option to blame you, no option to put it on you, because you're not letting them. They have to sit with it. And they've got no other choice but to look at their own thoughts and feelings. So some people are worth it, some people aren't, and you get to decide. So if you're dealing with a Jekyll and Hyde, decide, is this worth it for me to stick with? Or is it time for me to find a way to move on, to find a different support system? Okay? So if you feel stuck, reach out, send me a message. It takes me a little bit of time to get back to people because it's, me, a one-woman show. I don't have a team of 20 running all my stuff, but we've got great small support groups, masterminds, the live streams that I do, a whole searchable library of those. I can get you the link and the password for them. We've got a lot of support. And if you're tired of feeling stuck, if you're tired of feeling traumatized and taken advantage of and brutalized and emotionally abused, if you're time to make that, if it's time to make that switch, reach out because I can help you get your footing again and create a life that really works for you. Because when you get the love and support that you need, that you've always needed, that's how you grow. Okay. So I hope you have a great rest of your day. I plan on it. And I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Bye.